The phrase live-action Avatar is enough to send most diehard fans of the series into a depressive spiral, rivaled only by fans of Berserk waiting for a good anime adaptation. And while there are those who are still in denial about the 2016 movie ever existing,
there's no
M. Night Avatar movie
in Ba Sing Se.
There was a good bit of hype around the new Netflix reimagining of the animated series as a whole live-action series. There was a surprising amount of hope for the series online. Surely they'd learn from the mistakes of their predecessor. From the death of the movie, a new Avatar series would be reborn in a different format. Let's check in on how they're doing.
Okay, I've seen enough.
Going into the series, I wasn't expecting and didn't want a one-to-one translation, and I think anyone who did was going into this with the wrong idea. We already have one incredible Avatar the Last Airbender, and if we wanted that story beat for beat, we could just go and watch that at any point. Think of the new, or new-ish, I guess, Scott Pilgrim animated series. It's a wholly new take. But the strange thing with this series is that it kind of wants both. It wants to be a completely new thing and reimagine the series and fix its problems, but it also wants to rely on the goodwill that the original series built up. Some of the changes result in the series being much more tell and don't show than the original series. For instance, instead of just hearing about how Aang is just a kid who wants to play and have fun and not be thrust into a world of responsibility, we get a whole first season that shows us that Aang wants to take detours and goof around. He wants to go ride Elephant Koi and enjoy his trek to the North Pole. This series, before it even aired, made it very clear that they were removing many of these detours. They just didn't have enough time for them in this first season, but that doesn't really hold a lot of water. Yes, season 1 of the live action is only 8 episodes compared to the animated version's 20, but purely lengthwise, the seasons are actually quite comparable. So they cut all the goofing around to focus on other things, which again, could be fine. I don't want that one-to-one translation, I'd rather have a fresh take. But instead of showing us that Aang just wants to have fun and be a kid, they basically have him say to Appa, how he doesn't want it. But what I think is maybe the most egregious change they make to Aang, and I'm sure I'll see this talked about elsewhere, is that they change it so Aang doesn't technically run away. He just goes out to clear his head and ends up getting caught in a storm and frozen for 100 years. He doesn't really have to contend with the guilt of abandoning his people. It was completely an accident this time. But enough about his lack of character flaws. Let's segue into Sokka. God damn, look at that thing. Another of the biggest complaints I heard before the series was the reveal that they were toning down of Sokka's early series sexist tendencies. This was a big part of his character arc in the first season, so by removing that, they're making a big pivot in who his character was. If Sokka doesn't need to be humbled about who or what a warrior is or can be, then how exactly does his experience with Suki first shake out?
I think that might be a sign.
So the whole point of Suki's first interactions with Sokka in the anime, yeah, I'm just gonna call it anime, is to effectively humble him. Sokka has it in his mind that men are superior to women. So when this elite group of badass women show up, he has to confront himself about his preconceived notions. And as Sokka opens himself up and trains alongside the Kyoshi warriors, he and Suki develop a mutual attraction. In the live action version, Sokka immediately recognizes that Suki and the Kyoshi warriors are strong and has no problems with the fact that they're women. In fact, he still immediately wants to learn their ways of fighting. But in this version, Suki is like overtly thirsting over Sokka. Like she walks in on him shirtless and just kind of stares. It's a bit weird and doesn't feel like it develops really that naturally. Even her mom is like, hey, don't go after the Crimson Chin over there. In fact, almost all of the main character's flaws are either removed or reduced. Aang's guilt, Sokka's sexism, Zuko's anger, and Katara's good performance. All of it is basically nowhere to be seen. In fact, I think the only character that is shown dealing with flaws is, ironically, the only character who didn't really exhibit any until the final season, Azula. With Azula, they have something very important to work with. hindsight. They can see how her character arc should culminate and can work to plant a few more seeds in Azula's ultimate undoing. But in doing so, they also sort of recharacterize Ozai. They've made Ozai a much more caring character who ultimately wants the best for his son. This is basically the opposite of how he originally was in the series. He never really cared for Zuko in that way. I remember one specific line that jumped out to me that's actually from the comics. A line that Ozai says that I think perfectly encapsulate his character and his relationship with his children. Azula was born lucky, and Zuko was lucky to be born. I'm really curious to see how they take these characters going forward, as in the animated series they really didn't get much screen time or development until seasons 2 and 3. Maybe they'll lean more into Ozai sort of pitting his kids against one another, because that absolutely seems like something he'd do. They just need to keep him as the ultimate unredeemable villain for Aang, who has to figure out a wholly new way to stop him without killing him. The acting and the writing in the show are certainly trying their best sometimes. It feels weird to call out some performances that were worse than others, because some of the actors are children, and most children are straight up just not good actors. Put them in front of a green screen with some already wooden writing, and we're stuck with some scenes that are a bit of a slog to get through sometimes. Some of the actors are better than others. Sokka and Zuko are fine most of the time.
He ran!
Sorry, what?
He ran!
One more time?
He ran!
The actor who plays Iroh is absolutely killing it whenever he gets a chance to shine. Zuko and Iroh are amazing together, with one scene in particular being far and away the best scene in the entire series. Actually, let's detour quickly into the funeral for Iroh's son. This is a scene that is completely original to the live action. The scene is very short, but in it, we see Ozai give condolences to his brother before Zuko begins to talk with Iroh. Zuko gives a really nice speech to Iroh and takes a seat beside him. There's some incredibly subtle acting from Iroh as Zuko is talking. Everything about the scene works. The score, which is Leaves from the Vine, is a brilliant touch. It gives us more insight as to why Iroh is so partial towards Zuko. In fact, this scene and the subtlety we see from Iroh probably wouldn't work as well in animation. This is what the series could have and probably should have been. In fact, this scene is so good, it's really the only fully original scene that feels like it could have been in the original series. And again, Iroh and Zuko are really stealing the scene here. This is what I wanted the series to be, and when it's just these two, they're acting circles around literally everyone else, except maybe Zhao, who in a Bill Murray Garfield twist thought he was going to be in the other Avatar movies.
And when I first heard that it was for Avatar, I thought I was going to be Blue.
But the biggest crime I can think of with the writing is the general lack of comedy. At least comedy on purpose. The original series, even if it was for children, still holds up as incredibly funny. The series sort of abandons that, but not for lack of trying. They kind of lean into the most generic paint-by-numbers comedy. They have the most straight-up use of a Gilligan cut that I've seen in a long time. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's just this.
There's no way you're getting me on that.
The action and fighting don't feel like they deliver on what could have been, the incredible dynamic action that we saw in the animated series. Somehow the animated version feels like it has more weight than anything we see in the Netflix version. Just look at this small bit that's seen in the intro for the animated series and is seen again in the second episode of the Netflix Avatar. Aang riding on his scooter in the live action version feels incredibly slow and clunky, and it really doesn't make as much sense that Aang would lose control and hit the statue. Look at the animated one again. He's speeding up and speeding up, trying to show off and have fun. It's only after going too fast that he loses control. The live action version doesn't even get up to like a light jog before Aang smashes into the statue, with a lot less weight than we see in the animated version. As for most of the bending itself, the series makes bending feel like magic rather than an extension of their martial arts. And while I guess that's technically correct, like half of what their fighters are doing in the middle of their fights feels not very conducive to an actual fight. Like it feels more like they're putting in Mortal Kombat inputs to do moves rather than doing an actual martial art. Whereas the original felt more dynamic because everything was based around the ideas of martial arts. And it's fine to admit that some stuff just straight up doesn't work in live action without a solid amount of interpretation. Airbending in particular is incredibly hard to recreate in live action. It mostly boils down to throwing dust half the time. Like, there's a reason this worked better as an animated series. Overall, I don't think this is worse than the M. Night movie. It's borderline impossible for them to have dropped the ball that hard, but it feels like at almost every conceivable step along the way, they still managed to make wrong decisions. It was telling when the original creators decided to leave due to creative differences. They could see the writing on the wall, that Netflix didn't understand Avatar the Last Airbender.